Hello and welcome back to another wonderful episode of the Inside Reality. I'm your host Jimmy Tran, along with my co-host Jeffrey Candelaria, and what we have is just amazing. The whole point of our show is where we want to really tackle large conversations and allow real discussions and dialogue to exist. I mean, that's what our goal is for the show. And for every episode, it goes beyond just kind of surfacey, but really looking at and challenging each other, as well as challenging you as our viewer, to kind of get to
challenging
the core.
platitudes, challenging cliches.
Yeah.
Just
Assumptions and
common assumptions that people operate, their lives and their constructs, their attitudes, and continually challenging ourselves.
yeah,
Because
well, that's the only way to grow, really. I mean, if you think about it, right? I mean, like we talked about earlier in the side conversation. I mean, we only grow. We grow to the boundaries in which we allow ourselves to think and experience. And so,
But let's be honest. Again, this show is we're trying to be honest.
exactly.
People don't want growth because growth requires responsibility and accountability. And to be accountable, responsible, to grow, to innovate, it's a commit. It's difficult.
It is.
Difficult.
And it requires work because it does take a real honest look.
Absolutely.
I mean, because it's easy to just kind of coast through and kind of be on that
we
autopilot.
have to challenge operating like in a computer has an operating system. So many of us have had these operating systems called attitudes
Yeah.
that we operate by as a human condition. And to sit there and to bring scrutiny to that and maybe make an adjustment or a radical change, we have to say to ourselves and our friends and our, the experience, we were wrong.
Exactly.
We were wrong for a long time.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know. When I was young in college, I was a liberal Democrat. I mean, because I just thought at that particular time, that was the attitude that I wanted to personify.
Well, some would argue that that's still a better position.
Well, no, that's fine. Well, my point was, now I'm a registered Republican, and I have a lot of issues with the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Believe me.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very imperfect, corrupt apparatus as well.
Absolutely.
But when I put things on a scale, Jimmy, because I always put things on a scale when it comes to debate, whatever, the common sense, pragmatics, less government is better, strong military, self-reliance, the Republican Party says they stand for, weighs more than, all these bleeding heart issues that I'd like to at some point address. Once I have a job, I'm accountable and I'm healthy.
Yeah.
So there you go.
It's a certain priority for sure,
Yeah.
And I've shared this before too, in terms of if we look at nature and the natural order of structure, right? You see that when we're young, we are highly dependent and we need all the external structure in order to motivate us, to get us, doing whatever we need to do, right? Mm-hmm. In order to survive even, right? But as we mature and as we're able to think in a more personal way, right, and come to that, then we shift away from that and we become more autonomous and less dependent, right? Now the relationships.
I think in theory that makes sense. I don't know that actually happens because I just still think there's lots of kids living with their families.
But that is the condition, though. If you really think about it, right? That is the condition that is contributing to some of the things that we're experiencing today.
Absolutely.
Now, because there's a distinction.
Because remember, when you're living in a basement with your parents, that's really an external force,
correct,
or an external set of resources providing your livelihood.
Yeah.
So the Democrats have done, up until this election, a pretty good job, up until now, selling that government,
should be able to
social
take care
programs,
of it.
external forces, which now supplant your family in that basement situation, or that the resource apparatus that you're entitled to.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Up until this election, when it's all beginning to blow up in their stupid faces because it's just contrary to what you just said.
Yeah.
the human condition and its natural evolutionary track
Yeah.
that I think you were describing.
And that didn't even start. I mean, it's not even just from. I mean, this was probably the punchline, if you will. I mean, probably this started 8 years ago.
You mean the election?
The election.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, when
No, they were setting up this punchline.
exactly.
I think before Obama.
Even before, yeah, exactly. Well, that was the promise that people, that's why they vote overwhelmingly for Obama in his first term. But in his second term, they didn't vote as overwhelmingly, like,
Right.
in the same way. Like, there was no underscore, there was no exclamation point, right? So we saw
Because
that.
remember, he deported 5 million
Yeah.
illegals. The exporter in chief was Obama.
And
So they're already
yes.
criticizing Trump and he hasn't even taken off.
Yeah. Well, all that aside, I'm just saying that there was a great deal of hope because as right, I mean, if we look at the progression of things, right? I mean, you had Clinton. The Clinton years was great in terms of economically, right? I mean, he was famously saying, is the economy stupid, right, or whatever the quote
Yeah, it
is,
was
right?
Harville that said that from Louisiana, but yes.
Yeah,
it was
but
about the economy.
it was all about the economy,
Yeah.
and Clinton latched onto that, and
Yeah.
I think for the first time in modern history, we were in a surplus,
Yes.
because of some of the
Yeah, he
economic,
reconciled most of the deficit too.
yeah, but because he also introduced NAFTA during his term, that actually created the sucking that
Yeah.
Ross Perot
Right.
talks about. But that didn't come into effect until, of course, when he came into
Yeah, of course.
office. By then a lot of that had been starting to drain out. And the outsourcing to other countries and so forth,
Right.
and the NAFTA and all that created that. And so the momentum was good, but then but the war was necessary in a way, and it kind of galvanized people, with 9/11 and all that. And so that kind of created this artificial tightening. But the latter part, if you look at the second half of his term, after the war didn't really do the outcome.
Well, the other thing that happened after 9/11, because it was a very ephemeral, temporary sense of patriotism.
Exactly.
We're one country.
Exactly.
Because you remember World War II did the same thing.
Exactly.
But anyway, the point is this. The other thing that happened almost simultaneously after the temporary patriotic crescendo,
Unification, yeah.
introduction of
The Patriot Act and
technology.
certain types of technology, communication
and
in particular.
the way we communicate with each other almost cliquishly now in terms of groups
Yeah.
was amplified into,
Oh, yeah.
into the millions.
Yeah.
And so if I had a particular attitude or bias, I can now through technology gravitate toward those same
Individuals,
small-minded thinkers who want to continue to galvanize around that same orbit
Sure.
called the attitude.
Yeah.
The attitude.
Yeah.
And I think this changed almost everything.
It definitely did, because we saw that, right? Because what happened, that was introduced in 2007. Of course, 2008 came along,
Right?
And then
The
of course,
recession.
the recession was part of contributing factor, of course, and then people were like, okay, this is painful. We don't want to do that, right? And so here's a guy coming along the scene, even though he was kind of like a freshman in the political world.
Yeah.
They liked his message, change, right? And so I remember listening to that first, when he spoke, and
You talk about Obama?
Obama in his first term. And so there was a great deal of enthusiasm. And that's why he was able to really draw the people, and he got an
The whole thing
overwhelming.
changes always. That's a universal axiom
Sure.
that's been sold for 30,000 years.
Well,
I mean, it's not like the first time anyone said,
But-
let's talk about hope and change. Come on.
Agree. However, in this case, there was some differences, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he was the first black
Well,
president,
again,
and all these things worked.
Hold on. You said first black. Wasn't he half black?
Yeah.
So why do people like Kamala first black? So isn't
Fair.
it like completely dismissing half of their anthropological ethnic makeup? I mean,
It's politics,
I
it's how you
understand,
frame it.
but-
It's the
But what did
difference.
his parents that were on the white side of Obama?
Well,
how
actually,
did-
he was raised by his mother, who was
what-
white.
How
Yeah.
the
so-
hell did they feel?
Yeah.
I mean, give me a friggin' break. What again? This whole identity thing. You're the
Yeah.
first. lesbian, transgender, nun, born on a Thursday that likes hot dogs that's ever been elected president. I mean, we get into these stupid little checking of boxes. What does that even mean?
Well, that's
What
a good,
about competence? What about just like running a campaign that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
That's practical, that has a common good,
Yeah.
that conforms to our constitutional republic. I mean,
Yeah.
why not
Well-
form a campaign around those things instead of, oh, you're the first Chinese American or Vietnamese American? Who cares?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense at all?
No, I hear you. Now, even
When you're getting a thoracic surgical procedure, do you care that the person's a transgender lesbian, or do you want the best, most competent,
of course, the most
excellent
the most competent,
surgeon
best,
and
yeah,
people that surround that surgical procedure that there is?
Exactly.
So let's be honest. That's what this show's about. When people fly a damn airplane, they want the most competent pilot. I don't think they're like, oh, I want to go fly that airplane for the first time
Yeah.
across the Pacific Ocean because I heard it's a transgender lesbian nun. No, they want, and they won't say it, what are they, that those people on
Yeah.
that airplane. They want the competence,
Yeah.
right? They want the
course.
excellence of the skill set.
Yeah.
So let's stop with this whole stupid, I really want to vote for the first black lesbian nun of all,
Yeah. No. And
What about, I'm saying competence, man.
Yes.
Competency, practical outcomes.
Yes, I agree with you when it comes
so
to
annoying.
when it comes
The
to
first black, no, he's half black, first of all. And
Yeah.
why do we care? I mean, it's because he's going to be he has more sensibility toward that particular segment of the population. Well, what about the other 70% of the population? If that's your argument.
yeah.
Don't
Well,
get me going.
No, it's fine. Again, that's part of why we're here and having these conversations.
Naked observation.
Yeah. Now, I do have to say that, when I take a step back and look at and trying to get a grasp of it, I mean, there is, again, going back to other conversations we've had, tribalism is a big thing, right? It's kind of like, okay, you might not care about your neighbor, because he is Democrat or Republican, or you're not going to care about him because he likes this sport team versus that sport team, right? But then you go somewhere where you're both in a non-normal space. Like, let's say you go to Europe or you go to Asia or whatever, and you're traveling, and then you bump into each other.
Yeah, you find yourself in Bangkok, Thailand.
Yeah, and all of a
You're
sudden,
thrust into Bangkok, Thailand.
yeah, now
on
all
a
of
bus.
exactly. Now all of a sudden, your
You're
tribalism is
gravitate
shift.
towards somebody who looks like you.
Exactly.
Or talks
like you, or thinks
Talks.
like you, and that's part of what
Part
it
of the
is.
human condition.
Correct. And I think that's the part that they're trying to, these groups, right? These organizations.
Talk about the woke part of the party or whatever.
Well, to be fair, they do it, but so do the other side.
Okay, fine.
So
Okay.
I'm just saying that.
So what is the motivation behind that manipulation?
Well, the manipulation is to either garner support for their cause, right? I mean, that's one thing. I mean, like in the marketing world, right? We try to do,
Give me an example. Give me an actual example. I don't know if we can name brands, but
Yeah.
a particular sort of area of an industry where that manipulation of tribalism is taking place or does take place.
Well, I mean, an example, we can use computers, for instance, okay? Computer is a perfect example. That's my background, right? I'm a techie and all that. So we have the Mac versus the PCs, right? Those have been, that has been the classic fight, okay? There's an example where you've got Apple
the
people
Empire
versus
the Klingons.
Yeah, exactly.
Federation.
There's an example where you have people that swear by the PCs and you have the people that swear by the Macs, okay? Okay. Now they're both computers. They both do relatively the same thing, but they do it in a very fundamentally different way. Okay. And so, for instance, I grew up with PCs. I like a lot of the flexibility and versatility and the ability
How
to
does
be
that
able to,
relate to tribalism?
well, the same thing. So the people that are like on the other side of me,
So it's a tribe.
the
You got two
tribe,
tribes.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I mean, again, there are people that will like fight to the death, so to speak, to protect and to say Apple all the way or whatever, right? And then they'll have the other side, it's like, and you'll have to, now there's a little bit of the Linux people too in the mix, but most of it is the PC versus the Macs or the Apples.
Okay, that's
so
fine.
they'll hurl insults, so to speak, right? Oh, Macs are safer because you can't get virus until they got one, and then all of a sudden it's no longer true. So it's just that at one point, people that were on the Macs didn't really care. And so
I think what you're saying also is it doesn't just become an empirically set of verifiable outcomes or metrics. It becomes an emotional position.
Correct.
So now you're dealing with emotion,
Correct.
which doesn't respond well to logic or
Exactly.
scrutiny in terms of, like I said, empirically verifiable outcomes and metrics.
Exactly.
Because anytime, love is one of the most great examples of a chaotic, amorphous, non-logical emotion that
Correct.
drives everything.
Yeah, but if you have just love on one tier, it's not enough, right? Because they say love is, for instance, love is a verb, right? They say, right? It is an action. So that means that you can have
Love
the
will conquer
feeling,
all,
yeah,
which
you
is
can-
nonsensical. Well, how do I pay my mortgage?
exactly.
You know,
So those are all
you look beautiful naked, and we make love together, and I give you flowers, but
we're going to be on the street next week. We don't have rent.
Where do we live? The pragmatics I'm talking about, right? The practical, just logical outcomes that one candidate might truly personify versus electing somebody because they're a lesbian black person who's never been elected to that particular office is emotion, and it's not the cortex part of our brain functioning.
Well,
in my view.
yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? In marketing, there are a lot of different ways that try to drive the attention, right?
Of course.
So we grab your attention because of familiar. We grab your attention because of unfamiliar or really bizarre, right?
Or fear.
Or fear, sex. All these things are emotional that drives our attention. Once we got our attention, then we try to sell you on whatever the thing that we're trying to sell you. And to me, that's really what we're dealing with here as well, right? So when there's no option for anything else, okay, people will gravitate towards whatever is the most, like the common base, if you will, right? And so price, for instance, everything has a price, right? So that becomes the default position on comparison. Oh, you buy that's $400. This one, $300. So I'm going to buy the one that's cheaper, right? Because that's what we want. We want that value or whatever, right? Or if our idea is, okay, buy.
Well, then why is it that there are people, and I'll put myself in this category because I'm calling out hypocrisy. Yeah. Why did I spend $10,000 on a Rolex watch?
Easy. Again, because of the identity that you feel that it's because it's status. Exactly.
Well, that's also a certain sense of self-accomplishment.
Correct. And
a sense of the height of what a chronometer can be.
Correct.
There's an ideal. So there's a combination of lots of things.
Absolutely.
But I thought you were trying to make a point that ubiquitously people buy based on price.
If they don't have any other thing to compare with. That's where you didn't let me finish about that. Okay? So same thing here. If I'm black, I'm going to vote for a black guy because that's the default perspective. Now, I listen to him and I don't like what he says. Obviously, that's going to change my mind.
That's what happened during the Trump election.
Exactly.
Every segment of demographic composition
shifted,
voted more for Trump than,
which begs the question.
Relatively speaking,
yeah,
because I think those populations, including Hispanic males,
that was a huge number.
Unapologetically, I voted for Trump. Okay, and I don't feel any reason to apologize. It's because I didn't use a lot. I had to compartmentalize away some of my emotion that didn't like some of Trump's egomaniacal proclivities.
Sure.
And I had to compartmentalize and concentrate on this compartment, which was affordability, practical thinking, common sense, and the prioritization of what's important on Maslow's scale of priority.
And
Safety
yeah.
being probably number one.
Well, here's the one thing that a lot
I think it was survival.
Yeah.
You know,
But there
they're
is
interrelated.
there is actually one more category that is interesting, right?
Anyway, that's why these other segments, I think they compartmentalize away. You know, what color is he? Is he orange? Is he
No.
that?
Yeah.
I want to be safe. I want to be able to afford things.
Yeah.
And I want a secure place called wherever the hell I live.
Correct. Well,
I
here's
really think it came
Yeah.
down to these practical
and
points of prioritization.
and part of that driver, I think, also is that if you look at it, all the politically marginalized, okay, from the last whatever 18 years of political correctness and all that, right? If you look, you'll see that every one of those groups would pick a category that have been marginalized, okay, politically, have a line on the Trump ticket. Think about that for a moment, right? From RFK to Tulsi Gabbard, as far as these are Democrats. I mean, hardcore Democrats
Not
in
only
terms
them,
of
but
their
their families.
Yeah,
for 100
exactly.
Years, the Kennedy.
exactly.
100-year Democrat.
But yet they feel that it was okay from a risk standpoint, from the whole calculus of everything, that moving in this position and taking on
I
this
also felt
position
like
was better.
I can't speak for them, but I do feel a sense that, like someone like RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, I feel like they felt they were betrayed by their own party.
That's part of it.
I felt like
but that's
their
what I mean
party,
by
ran away from what they were convicted to stand for.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean by the politically marginalized. Okay. Hands down, that's who you see, which is why you see the white supremacists, for instance, as much as we might not like them, gravitate towards him for the same reason. Okay, but
To be
they
a white male in America, I think
Exactly.
Let me extrapolate or surmise. You're saying that if you're a white male American, 47 years old, you make $300,000 a year, you're in a bank, you've been
marginalized.
vilified, demonized over the last 10 years, and they're like, they got kind of fed up with that.
Correct, and that's why
And they also voted for Trump, just basically as a way to say, I'm not going to take this anymore.
Correct.
So maybe it wasn't so much a vote for Trump as a repudiation of being vilified and demonized.
Exactly.
Many of these segments were
Correct.
this
Exactly.
thing called the American population.
Correct. And I think that's the part that the Democrat machine and those that are running it and everything fail to realize.
Yeah.
They basically dropped the last, they call it the feather, right? That just broke
The camel's back.
and the straw, whatever. But that's what happened. And so that's why this thing tipped. That's why you saw this rush. I mean, if you look at every category, there's a redshift on it. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And even though he may not have won,
Women, white women,
Yeah.
Hispanics, blacks, young people.
yeah.
I mean,
all the demographics that was once part of the Democratic,
and he won
stronghold.
He won the swing states.
Yeah.
He won the swing states.
So that's why it's so important. Again, we can lie to ourselves, and it's very easy to do. And we can even sometimes lie to one another.
But the arithmetic doesn't lie.
Correct.
He won the popular vote and the electoral vote.
Yeah. And the
And
way
Senate and House.
the way he won it too is what is I think a bigger deal.
Relatively speaking, he overwhelmingly defeated
Correct.
Kamala.
Yeah.
Well, but you also have to simultaneously, because this is inside reality, where we have naked observations. It wasn't just all this, the response to be vilified by all these
No,
suburbs.
of course not.
It
Yeah.
was also Kamala was not a very good candidate.
That's
Wasn't very good at articulating her policies.
does she have a policy though? That's been the question. Even people that were diehard supporters of hers,
I can't.
have
She herself
questioned
said,
that.
She herself basically expressed that she didn't.
Yeah.
When she went on The View,
Oh yeah. That's
a very friendly
towards her.
medium
Yeah.
toward her personally, emotionally, and in terms of
politically.
the politics of it.
Absolutely.
Threw her basically a softball. We're going to throw you a softball so you can hit a triple or a home run, and asked her the question, which I think began to cost her the election.
Oh, but
What will you do
differently.
different
Yeah.
than the incompetent, mentally incapacitated by, they didn't frame it like that, but that's essentially what they said. And her answer was, I can't think of anything at this time that I would do that would be any different.
Yeah.
I mean, give me a freaking break.
And did you even follow
Somebody in 8th grade running for president of 8th grade
up?
office, right, would know how to differentiate themselves from the person B that's running against them, right?
Well,
when you're in 8th grade
yeah.
and you're running for president, you'd say, well, here's how I'm different than Jimmy.
Yeah.
I mean, she couldn't answer that most rudimentary question. My point is this: she was a bad candidate, running a bad campaign, and nobody knew what her policies were. So beyond the whole, I'm responding back to be demonized for the last 10 years. She was also a bad candidate.
Yeah.
Let's face it. And
yeah,
Radovan
definitely.
campaign.
Yeah,
Remember
yeah.
her first campaign? Oh, joy, vibration. Then she went to, and again, we're just extrapolating out of what we think they did. He's Hitler. He's, just like throwing eggs at your opponent.
Yeah.
Then they went back to, no, we think we're joyful again. You know,
Yeah. And then they attempt to try to guilt the black men to come back into the fold.
Then you had Obama lecturing blacks if you don't vote for the first, half black person.
Yeah.
You're a disgrace to your own ethnicity. So none of it worked, man.
Yeah.
It was just a bad campaign, bad candidate, and then you had, like you said, you had this last 20 years of
vilification,
being lectured to about just common sense, practical thinking.
Yeah.
Like 20 million people coming across the border. What's wrong with that?
Well, it doesn't even have to be.
What's wrong with that?
Well, it doesn't even have to be practical thinking. It doesn't even have to be
20
practical
million
thinking.
people, we don't even know where they are. They're crossing the border.
Yeah.
It's just, it's insanity, man.
Yeah. But it's also not just practical thinking. I mean, just the freedom to think was
Good
penalized.
point. Yeah, right.
That's
right.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like
being censored.
right now.
Being censored.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if our show here, I'm going to be publishing it on YouTube, right? I don't know if this show will get torn down because of violating some kind of community, whatever. But I don't really care, because part of what we're doing here with the show is to really not only accentuate those issues,
Try to inspire people to challenge thinking externally and internally. That's
correct.
all.
Yeah.
That's all we're trying to do, man.
Yeah.
Is like, I have a position, I have an attitude, I need to challenge myself about that continuously.
Absolutely.
And clearly there are these external policies that I just absolutely disagree with. Like, for example, tampons in boys' bathrooms. That's beyond absurd, okay?
Yeah.
So absolutely, and again, unapologetically and unequivocally, I would oppose any administration that would want to install feminine hygiene products in mid-school boy bathrooms. Okay,
That doesn't
as an
make any
example.
sense. Yeah.
It doesn't. It simply doesn't. But we're going to continually challenge each other,
Of course.
and ourselves about attitudes and conviction positions that we occupy.
Yeah.
That's what this is about.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to do.
No, it isn't. We got to move a lot of our conversations from that other so there's three parts of us, right? There's the conscious mind, there's the unconscious mind, and then there's the physical body, right? I mean, minimally, those are the three dimensions.
Right.
There's a fourth dimension, of course, that a lot of people also talk about, is the spiritual dimension, right? So there's the essence part of who we are as well. That,
we want
kind
to,
of
and that's
pull it
really
together.
a function of ego, because I think it's because we think we don't want to. We want to have something that we get attached to that's eternal.
Sure.
That's what I think spirituality.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of
and then
it
of
for
course
sure.
the fifth dimension. They sang that song "Up, Up and Away," up and away. The joke. But you're right. The fourth dimension is the attachment to something bigger than ourselves,
Absolutely.
which makes us eternal like God-like.
Well, but that's also in order us to be connected. That is the part, right? Because there's no other part. I mean, physically we're not connected, right? Mentally we're not connected, other than our conversations and whatnot, right? But in terms of the goo, if you will, right? If you were to say, okay, there's some goo, right? The only goo, if you will, that connect us is spiritual. Okay, I mean, it's the essence, it's our presence. Like right now when we're sitting here, and so that's kind of how I kind of perceive how these things are broken down. Now each of those might have many striations, if you will, right? But just to keep it simple, you have at least those four aspects. And
Okay.
and in terms of what we talk about when we talk about the inside reality is that we gotta break things down, even from into those four components, if you
Know
will.
thyself. I mean,
Absolutely.
every great sage across the spectrum of the human condition, the last, I'm going to say 10,000 years,
Easily, yeah.
whether it's Lao Tzu or whether it's Siddhartha Gautama or Jesus.
Yep.
You gotta know who you are, man.
Yeah. That's the first step.
Self-awareness.
That's the first step.
And we have, because of this and a lot of other things, fear, all the populations in the millions throughout the country, maybe the world, I don't know, but I know in this country, are looking for external sources to define them,
Yeah.
as opposed to the existentialist who, I exist before the stimulation.
Exactly. And
So I tend to be more of an existentialist. I
yeah.
think.
Well, my mentor always said, if you don't know who you are, how can you expect other people to know?
Well, no,
You know,
it's
that's
a simple thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't know where you are, how do you know what destination
you're gonna get to? Yeah.
you're bound for?
Well, some people say, hey, I'm just here for the journey, bro.
I'm not sure what that means. It's like, again,
It
because
was kind of like,
I'm a practical guy. Like, okay, well, I want $5 for gas.
Yeah,
Would
yeah,
be my
yeah.
response.
yeah,
It's like anything else. I'm this kind of guy. Maybe because I grew up through some dysfunctionality and hardship as a kid, but still had a pretty good childhood. It's like, like some hobo guy in a tent. Like he'll ask me for money. I'm like, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $5 if you at least ostensibly say you're not going to buy it for booze or drugs.
yeah,
But I want you to help me unload my truck. Then I'll give you the $5.
Yeah.
Point is, make a contribution,
yeah,
whatever that is,
yeah.
to something bigger than yourself. And that's where we've lost our way. Because I think everyone, of course, some of these are quadriplegic and, can't move. I understand. But
I would even challenge that.
okay, fine.
Well, no. Here's why.
But
Hold on.
make a damn contribution.
Absolutely.
Whatever it is.
So one of the most famous quadriplegic, of course, is Stephen Hawking.
Okay.
Okay. Now I don't know if he was that way his whole life, or he became that way after an accident or whatever. But here's an individual. Okay, regardless of what you think of him and what you think of his ideas or whatever, he lived that,
Yeah.
right?
No, yeah.
Other people like Helen Keller, right? I mean, she was blind, but yet she contributed,
Blind, mute,
whatever. But Beethoven, same thing, right? I mean, so you have people that didn't allow whatever the limitations were.
Ray Charles, blind.
Exactly.
Stevie Wonder.
You name them and you see them, and
admire
these are great individuals too in their respective area of
admire
influence.
it. I admire it.
So that's what it is. And so for those of us that are have full limbs and full functioning whatever, why are we not?
Well, Kennedy said again. At that time, I was an admirer of John and JFK.
Yeah.
And I'm a Republican. But
Yeah.
those two people are still in my mind. Again, because I'm not a hypocrite, or I try not to be.
Yeah.
They're political heroes for me. They
Sure.
just kind of are.
Yeah.
And you don't have to like it, but I like RFK and his messaging, and John F. K.
Yeah.
Lander and all
That's
that. But I think it was John F. K. that said, and that was actually probably quoted from another sage, probably the Bible, of much which is given, because he was a
Much is
wealthy,
expected. Yeah.
very much is expected.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And he also said, we choose to go to the moon because it's
Not
hard, not because it's easy.
Exactly.
I like that
Yeah.
kind of challenge-oriented, attitudinal thinking. And I don't know that we celebrate that anymore.
No, we don't, and we know that we don't is because
Do we know that we don't?
I think
Watch The View. Watch CNBC. Watch Joy, whatever the hell her name. She's like, achievement. It's reserved for white privilege because only those people can do some of that stuff. Well, maybe that's partially true.
Well, here's the
But
thing.
celebrating excellence should be something that collectively we all should idealize
Yeah.
and aspire for.
Yeah.
In my
Now, the way I boil this down, and then you may not agree with me in this, certainly possible, right? There's the odds of that. is that there's to me there's like in a way there's only two forces. I'm not saying only in the very definitive sense, but just in this sense, right? So when you look at things, you see you have feminine and you have masculine, and I think that those two energy, not the specific manifestation of them being male and female and all that, but more specifically the energy of masculine,
Yin and yang.
the yin and yang. If you look at that, you'll see something very interesting, right? The yin or the feminine, okay, is a very passive, energy source. Okay, that's the nature of that energy versus the other one is the yang, which is the active. Okay, that's how.
So you're saying women are nouns and men are verbs?
Metaphorically, yes. And the reason for that is
Just pissed off half our audience.
well, we this is not the. Here's the thing that's different is that as humans we actually are. We are a composite, a hybrid of those two. So that's why it's not just exclusively one or the other.
I get it. Yeah.
But
So you're saying X, Y, me, I'm a man, I don't use pronouns, I'm a man. But I still have femininity too, right?
absolutely, you came from your mother.
I get that.
I mean, believe it or not, you're more your mother than you are your father.
I
Even.
get that.
But here's where I was going to explain
I'm still an X and a Y. Okay? Just for the record.
Okay, so here's how it works, right? Because femininity values the intrinsic value, right? That's what femininity. It's the essence of the who you are in the human being. Okay, just that.
It's ontology.
That's it.
And masculinity
And it is the actions that.
epistemology.
There you go.
Oh,
Hey-o.
show.
That's right.
Well, you come on. Ontology, epistemology, and using it correctly, and relating it to the yin and yang. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What
See,
other podcast does that have?
that's to me is what we're dealing with here, and so this is why masculinity is under attack, because there's this misunderstanding of what masculinity is versus what's femininity, and so I like to use this and forgive my example, if you will. It may be a little bit terse, I guess. Okay, if you take femininity and you move it all the way to its extreme, you end up with a rock.
Okay.
If you take masculinity, you move it all the way to the other extreme, you get nuclear annihilation. Okay, those are the extremes.
Okay.
Okay, that's what we're seeing in a way when those two. But when they come together, what's really interesting about it is that when they come together and they come in balance. And when I say balance, I'm not saying 50-50, right? But balance in the sense that and
More of a complementary
correct,
relationship.
exactly, because they have. And if you look at nature, you'll see it exists just the way it is. And when you do that, that's where life comes from, is when you bring when these two things collide. So here's an example. When, in the art world, right, people say, oh, you're creative and so forth, right? And so because you're creative, you must be this or you must be that. Well, what's interesting is that that's, to me, a misunderstanding of creativity. Creativity is actually the union of those two energy that's happening in our brain.
I don't think that's that astounding a leap to take. I mean, purple, the most beautiful color in my view, is a combination of
Red and blue,
which are
exactly.
the opposite parts
of the spectrum, exactly.
The wavelength,
Absolutely.
representing the large wavelength, which is red, and blue, the smaller.
Exactly.
Bring red and blue together, it's purple. That's why most of the kings and the
And royalty color, yeah.
it's a royal color because it's such a.
Yeah.
It was difficult to put those two colors together.
Correct.
I think they had to go to India to get the ink and this and
Yeah,
that. Purple is, to your point, the combination of
Yeah.
the union, the complementary relationship of opposite sides of the color spectrum and the light spectrum.
Correct.
Remember, red is larger waves.
Yep, exactly.
Blue is, and when you see a redshift in astronomy, not astrology,
Yeah,
astronomy,
yeah.
the object is moving away from
Away
the
from you.
observer.
Yep, it's lengthening those wavelengths.
So now we're talking astronomy.
Yeah, so let's do it.
Wavelengths.
Yeah. Good
Only
stuff.
on Inside Reality.
Yeah.
I'm Jeffrey Candelaria, and this is Jimmy Triumph.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
So I wanted to talk about the election in terms of this, and we had talked about this off air,
Absolutely.
and I've got about a few more minutes. I think there was a big part of the population that ended up being commandeered by a small part of the population, the woke part of the progressive left, transgenders and all this pronoun, all that nonsense. That's a small percentage of 330 million Americans.
Sure.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So then, but for some reason the liberal part of the media, most, not all,
Yeah.
latched onto that.
Yeah.
And my theory is, again, not representing not only not the real Democratic Party, but certainly not the Republican Party, and certainly not a preponderant population in our country. But if you're Morning Joe or Joy, whatever her name is, or Nancy Pelosi or Schumer, or any of these dumbbells, they're making $3 million a year, $2 million, whatever. They have a mansion, right?
Yeah.
They haven't driven a car in 30 years. They have a limo driver. They have people around them with guns protecting them.
Yeah.
They live in houses that have walls. So if you have all this opulence and you have all this aristocracy living kind of
Sure.
lifestyle, you don't care how much a ribeye costs. You don't care how much eggs cost. You don't care that gas is $7 a gallon or what it was in California, do you?
Yeah. Probably not.
So you can
Yeah.
afford all these encumbrances, economic and whatever. A war in Ukraine, who cares? So they can afford to go down to a prioritization scale.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm already rich, I'm already this, I'm already that, I'm already safe, I'm already pretty healthy. Oh, you know what? What's going on with the transgender world? But some working guy is trying to carve out a living, or a woman, single mom. Do you think she's going to worry about that issue over here when she's dealing with how am I going to pay my mortgage?
Yeah.
So my theory is the mass media comprised of mostly people making a lot of money, relatively speaking,
Sure.
and almost an aristocratic kind of a
Yeah.
lifestyle position, could afford to go down that prioritization hierarchy to these issues that you and me can't think about because we're trying to carve out a living.
Yeah.
And that's a theory. What do you think?
No, I think that's definitely right on. the
And that's
mark,
why
you
Trump
know.
got elected or won, because the average person voting for Trump isn't thinking about that 89th issue down the
Well,
scale,
Exactly.
right? Because they're thinking about affordability, health, crime, security.
Yeah. I mean, I saw an interview yesterday. I was kind of going through some notes to get prepared for this conversation, and one of the people were interviewing people on the streets in Pennsylvania, and they were wondering why the Latino votes had shifted towards the Republican side, and particularly Trump, and one of the I forget who it was had done his interview, said that, I don't know how, he said, I don't know how many times, in our conversation I was asking about things that the price of eggs came up
Right.
as being one of the defining reasons why they were picking their position, So
Because eggs are a benchmark for affordability.
Exactly.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
And another thing I want to clarify, Jeffrey Candelara here, this is Jimmy Track. If you'd like to sponsor the show, get a hold of us, called The Inside Reality. When Trump was here in Albuquerque about a week before the election,
Yeah.
I was really taken by, in a good way, his stark, naked, I don't know the answer to this question. He polled, I think there were 4,000 people
Yeah.
that were in Albuquerque by the airport.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know the answer to this question, which I like this part about
Sure.
Trump. If he don't know, he'll just say, I don't know. Unlike most politicians who claim they know what the Latino vote is. He said, we're in Albuquerque. He said, I love Albuquerque. He says, but do you want to be called Hispanics or Latinos?
Oh yeah.
I loved that. We don't use the word Latino in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Maybe certain little populations. We're like Candelaria. I did my DNA
Sure.
test, and many of us here who've been here, not just 2 generations, not just 3, 6, 7, 8 generations, we've been here.
Yeah.
Candelaria's got here in 1620, all right? That was a long time before even the Constitution was formulated 1787.
Was it before or after the Mayflower? Because 1620 is Mayflower, right?
Well, I think
Right around.
the same time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
But there were other folks here
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
in New Mexico from
From
Spain,
Spain, even earlier than that.
that
Yeah.
predated. You know,
Yeah.
Coronado was here.
The
He didn't settle here.
1500s. Yeah.
No, he was there in 1540.
Yeah.
Right.
1500. Yeah.
Nobody knows. Anyway, Trump says you want to be called Hispanics or Latino. Overwhelmingly, we want to be called Hispanics.
Yeah.
Because we originated from Spain, most
yeah,
of us.
as opposed to from
Of course, we
Mexico.
have Native
Yeah.
American blood and all the other. I happen to have Basque and Arabic and Cuban and whatever. But the word Latino is another word that just bugs the crap out of me because we don't use that word to define our ethnicity here in New Mexico.
Sure.
Yet these dumb donut-eating politicians on the national front use the word Latino and Hispanic interchangeably,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
it's absolutely not correct.
Well, it's kind of like in the Asian world, right?
course.
Asian and Oriental,
Good
you know,
point.
it's similar to that. Actually, what I want to bring up something that can be a little controversial, but I think it's fair conversation since we're having this open conversation
I
here.
ain't scared.
Okay. So, in New Mexico, and in New Mexico really only, is the only state where you have a minority group that's actually a majority,
Yeah, Hispanic.
you know, Hispanic. Okay, and what's interesting is that, you know, even the whites, okay, in terms of New Mexico, some of those are Hispanic, but they just claim white because that's how that happens. You know, I don't know how, you know, but you get my point, right, with that.
What's your question?
So my question is that why is it that in New Mexico I still hear this to play the minority card all the time, you know, from Hispanics?
You mean the oppressed crap?
Yeah.
Because
So-
the Catholic ethic afforded me a great education, but the Catholic ethic in New Mexico, I want to do a
Yeah,
show
we
on
talked
this.
about this, yeah.
St. Francis of Assisi was kind of the model that most of the Catholics use in New Mexico.
Yeah,
And St. Francis taught poverty,
yeah,
austerity, hyper simplicity.
yeah,
Almost, I think he even flagellated himself,
sure.
beat himself.
Yeah.
So he taught that suffering and being unworthy are like noble gifts that we give to God.
Hmm.
And you wonder why in New Mexico, when we're oppressed and suffering, we
There's
see
a
that
rejoicing.
there's rejoicing there. It's
Yeah.
the most absurd, ridiculous construct I've ever seen personified by literally about 1 million to 2 million, no, not two, over 1 million people in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, at Easter time, I think we're one of the only states where people walk to Santuario Church and beat themselves over the backs
As they do.
and
Yeah.
suffer. Oh, I'm suffering. So they see suffering as a noble gift to be rejoiced and celebrated. I think it's the most backward, nonsensical, absurd personification of living and giving something to what they call God I've ever experienced in my life.
No, there's some advantages to that because on the
Do you understand?
I totally understand that. Yeah.
Have you seen it?
Oh, I seen it a lot.
And your thoughts again are?
I'm just baffled in a way because you know when I'm an outsider, right? I didn't grow up here, so I don't have the same, you know, although I grew up in LA, right, which have a different
That's a different interpretation. of Catholicism.
exactly.
Very
And most of the people that are in LA are Latino, more specifically from Mexico than they are from Spain, and so that you don't have this deep rooted history here that
Right.
that drives it. But you know, on one level, it makes sense to play the minority card because you get a lot of good stuff, right,
Yeah,
from federal government and stuff like that. Which is why we have such a rich government bureaucracy and all that stuff here. You know, I mean, the government gives us a lot of
Right.
goodies. So the question is,
You also get the emotional support. Oh, mijito, pobrecito. That means poor little thing.
yeah,
And the abuela, the grandma, and the aunties, they come out and give you a big hug and they put their big bosoms on you as a little kid, and you're like, "Oh, I'm a victim. This
Yeah.
feels good."
So how much of
So
that?
people grow up with that. Man.
Yeah. So how much of that though is because I know that part of the Spanish Inquisition was also a very deep part of
That was like 1500.
15. Yeah. So I'm wondering how much of this is self protection, if you will, right? To if I don't grow to become big and visible and then maybe.
Well, I think it's fear. I think the Catholic Church in New Mexico, anyway, used fear to manipulate
Yeah.
people, as most
Religions all do that
because
to
most
some
religions
level.
do that.
Yeah.
But the Catholic Church did something else too. And I'd like to talk about this sometime.
Yeah.
They made the human condition, God relationship, transactional.
Mm,
A
interesting.
negotiation.
Yeah.
If you do this all of your life, we're going to give you heaven. It's a transaction.
Sure.
It's an absolute transaction. I'd like to dissect that
Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
I think most religions are transactional, but the New Mexico Catholic relationship with God, in my view, was a pretty well thought out negotiation
Hmm.
and executed as absolutely a transaction. You do this for me, God, or the church, really. The
Yeah,
church, really the church. You do this for the church, Catholic Church, and we're going to give you eternity in heaven. Can't think of a better prize.
It is. Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah.
You like that?
Yeah.
All right, time to wind up.
Yeah. We're out of time, but we'll definitely need to dive deeper into that conversation. Because I mean, my family are Catholic. So one side of the family.
Again,
So I have, but it's a different flavor of Catholicism.
Absolutely.
So
Dominicans, Jesuits, very different than the Franciscans.
I have no idea what flavor, but I just remember growing up in LA, like I said. So
And again, I thank the Catholic Church for affording me a great education. But the dogma part,
yeah.
sorry.
All
All right, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for
Jeffrey
opening up.
Candelaria, Jimmy Tran.
Yeah, thank you for watching the Inside Reality, where you can see how deep dive we go into these different topics. I mean, yeah, it might feel like we're kind of bouncing around, but they're all connected.
Oh, they are.
We're doing the weave.
It's really improvisation like jazz.
There you go.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. See you soon next time. Bye bye.